My stepdaughter intentionally ruined my car, accusing me of living off her father's money. What she doesn't realize is that her father has actually been living off my income, and now, as a result, no one is paying for her college tuition. For context, I have been with my husband Thomas for 5 years and married to him for 2. He has a 19-year-old daughter, Rachel, from his previous marriage. Tragically, his first wife passed away roughly 5 years before we met. Rachel was only 9 years old at the time, and the loss profoundly impacted her. Over the years, coping with this tragedy became a significant challenge, and her behavior worsened as she got older. When I first met Rachel, she was around 13 or 14 years old, and the interaction was far from welcoming. From the very start, she made it evident that she saw me as an outsider and an intruder. She explicitly told me that I could never replace her mother, a role I never intended to assume, and she stated that she would never accept me as a part of her family. Despite this, I genuinely tried to foster a relationship with her, but Rachel seemed determined to make my presence as unpleasant as possible, likely in the hopes that I would eventually leave. I raised these concerns with Thomas and suggested therapy to help Rachel work through her grief and emotions. However, Thomas explained that he had already tried various approaches, including therapy, but they had not succeeded. Rachel appeared completely uninterested in making any progress or addressing her feelings. Following his wife's passing, Thomas had not pursued any serious relationships for a long time. I was the first woman he had dated seriously since her death. While he had gone on a few casual dates prior to meeting me, I was the only one he chose to take seriously. From the beginning, Thomas was honest about his situation and shared that Rachel would likely be difficult to win over. He also told me it would take time for her to process her grief, which is why we took our relationship slowly. We dated for a year before I was introduced to the family. However, even then, Rachel's hostility was immediate and unrelenting. Over the next several years, Rachel frequently lashed out, threw tantrums, and was openly disrespectful toward me. Despite my efforts to remain patient and understanding, her behavior became increasingly difficult to deal with. Eventually, I decided to disengage and shift my focus to other areas of my life, rather than continue enduring her hostility. On numerous occasions, I urged Thomas to address Rachel's behavior more effectively. While he did reprimand her from time to time, the results were always short-lived, and Rachel would quickly return to her usual attitude. Despite all this, I loved Thomas deeply and wanted to make our relationship work, which is why I stayed by his side for nearly 6 years, tolerating his leniency toward Rachel. What recently happened, however, pushed me past my breaking point. Around 3 years ago, Thomas proposed to me and I happily accepted. At the same time, he decided to pursue a new business venture. Unfortunately, his business struggled to succeed, and we faced significant financial challenges. I supported his efforts for almost 3 years because it was a passion project for him, but when it became evident that the business wasn't viable, I tried to encourage him to consider other options. I suggested he return to his previous job or explore better opportunities, as continuing to invest time and resources into the business was proving to be unsustainable. This accusation was incredibly insulting to me. I have always been independent and prided myself on my self-sufficiency, so being labeled a gold digger was both hurtful and infuriating, especially since it was actually Thomas relying on my finances. A few weeks ago, Rachel confronted me directly. When I asked her to complete some chores, she called me a gold digger, accusing me of having no self-respect or dignity. Horrified, I asked her what she meant, but before I could clarify the situation, Thomas intervened. Stopping the argument. He then pulled me aside privately and asked me not to reveal the truth to Rachel. He was deeply concerned about preserving his image as a father, explaining that it would be humiliating for him to admit to her that he had been financially dependent on me. Reluctantly, I agreed to keep the truth to myself out of respect for Thomas. However, this decision came at a cost. Rachel, believing her assumptions to be true, began using the accusation against me at every opportunity. While I felt tempted to reveal the truth to her, I refrained for Thomas's sake. When Rachel came home for her winter break, I knew she would only be staying for a few weeks, so I resolved to tolerate her behavior during that time. Having endured her hostility for so many years, I thought I could manage for a short while longer. However, this time, Rachel seemed determined to escalate the situation and make my life even more difficult. A few days ago, Rachel took my car without permission and crashed it just before I was supposed to leave for an important meeting I had been preparing for over several days. Normally, I leave for work around 9 a.m., but on that particular day, I had a critical meeting with a major client and planned to leave much earlier to ensure I wouldn't be late. Thankfully, I had prepared in advance and was ready to leave ahead of time. However, Rachel had gotten ready even earlier, and when I went outside to check on my car, I was horrified to find a massive dent on the hood and scratches all along the sides. What made things even worse was Rachel standing next to the car, holding the keys in her hand with a smug smile, as if she was proud of what she had done. Seeing this, I completely lost my composure and started shouting at her. Normally, I am not an aggressive person, but that day I lost control and ended up slapping Rachel across the face. I don't regret doing it. She tried to shove me back, but by then, Thomas had come outside, quickly assessed the situation, and managed to restrain Rachel before she could escalate things further. I was in tears, not only because I couldn't drive my car to the meeting, but also because that car was one of the first significant purchases I had made with my own money, and it held great sentimental value. While I had to take a taxi to the meeting, which wasn't a huge inconvenience, it felt inappropriate to show up to such an important career opportunity with a high-profile client in a taxi. I was deeply upset about everything that had just happened. Rachel, however, showed no remorse and instead began yelling at me, claiming this was a lesson I deserved. She accused me of being arrogant for someone who relied on her husband to support her lifestyle. She mocked me for talking so much about the meeting, saying that at the end of the day I was still living off her father's money. Rachel's tirade continued as she kicked my car again and spat on the ground, calling me a gold digger and accusing me of trying to force Thomas to sell his business just to benefit myself financially. All the while, Thomas struggled to hold her back. That was the moment I decided I couldn't keep hiding the truth for Thomas's sake. I told Rachel everything, making no effort to soften my words. I wanted her to feel the sting of the truth because, at that moment, I believed she deserved it. I didn't care that she was only 19 or that I was an adult. I told her how her father's business had been failing for 3 years and that I had been financially supporting both him and her. I told her that I had even been paying for her college tuition and that, although her father had promised to repay me, I was the one who had been footing the bill. I made it clear she had no right to call me a gold digger or treat me with such disrespect when, if anything, it was her family relying on me for financial support. Rachel froze in shock, her expression completely blank. Thomas stood silently, clearly taken aback. I wiped my tears away and walked off to book a taxi for my meeting, refusing to look back because I didn't want Rachel to see me cry. Thankfully, the meeting went well. I had left early enough to arrive on time and compose myself before meeting the client. In hindsight, taking a taxi didn't seem like such a big deal. It was likely more in my head. When I returned home after the meeting, I saw my car still parked in the same damaged state. The sight of it broke my heart all over again, so I called a friend who owns a repair shop to take care of it. I couldn't bring myself to go inside the house, so I took another taxi to a nearby hotel and decided to stay there instead. That was the moment I realized the extent of the disrespect I had endured in my own home, all because Thomas refused to stand up to his daughter. I couldn't bear the thought of returning to that house to fix things with them. They simply didn't deserve it. I kept hoping Thomas would at least call me after I returned from the meeting and went to the hotel to see how I was doing, but he didn't. The next morning, after crying myself to sleep, I woke up and made a decision. I couldn't live with them anymore. Love clearly wasn't enough to sustain this relationship. I called my lawyer and told him I wanted to file for divorce. I also called my brother, asking him to go to the house, pack some of my belongings, and bring them to me, as I couldn't bear to see Thomas or Rachel. When my brother went to the house to pick up my things, Thomas seemed to realize that I wasn't planning to return anytime soon. That's when he and Rachel started bombarding my phone with calls and messages. I muted their notifications but didn't block them, as I wanted to know what they had to say. When I finally checked their messages, I saw that they were apologizing and asking me to come back. Thomas said he wanted to make things right, and Rachel surprisingly claimed she was willing to apologize and change. While I expected this from Thomas, Rachel's sudden change in tone shocked me. However, I wasn't so easily convinced. It was clear they only reached out because they needed me. If Thomas had genuinely regretted his actions, he would have contacted me the same day. Instead, he waited until he realized I wasn't coming back. Even when I didn't return that evening, he didn't reach out. Only when my brother showed up to collect my things did he decide to reach out and try to apologize. His apologies felt hollow and meaningless to me. As for Rachel, it was immediately clear why she was apologizing. She needed a way to fund her college education, and up until this point, I had been covering her tuition. She obviously still required my assistance, considering she had 2 more years before graduation. Given Thomas's financial situation, I was her only option. Being the spoiled person she is, I'm sure it never crossed her mind that she could work during college like most people do or take out a student loan. Despite their apologies, I was deeply disappointed because I knew those apologies were insincere and only being offered out of convenience. It took me a long time to realize this, but I finally understood that I loved Thomas far more than he loved me, much more than he deserved. However, it was time to prioritize myself and let him go. For the past 6 years, all he had done was make empty promises, assuring me that he would fix things between Rachel and me. I had tolerated it until now, often just telling Rachel to improve, but there were never any real consequences for her actions. That's why eventually she had the audacity to do something like this and genuinely expect to get away with it. I spoke with my lawyer about the divorce and also mentioned that I wanted to file a lawsuit against them to make them pay for the damage they caused. After reading those messages and recognizing how fake their apologies were, I decided to respond to Thomas. I told him I was proceeding with the divorce and that nothing he said would change my mind. I had waited long enough for them to improve, but since that clearly wasn't going to happen, I refused to wait any longer and allow them to disrespect me repeatedly. The next morning, I woke up to another 100 messages from Thomas, begging me not to leave and claiming he was willing to do whatever it took to make me stay. He had also attempted to call me multiple times during the night, but since I was asleep and had his notifications muted, I wasn't aware at the time. His messages started to irritate me because he was acting as though he was genuinely do whatever it took. I knew he was just saying those things for the sake of saying them, as he had done so many times before. I had allowed myself to be fooled in the past, but this time I decided to give him an ultimatum. If he was willing to make things work on my terms, then maybe I would consider coming back. In reality, I had no intention of returning because I had made my decision with great difficulty and wasn't going to change my mind. However, I wanted to see what he would say. I replied, telling him that I would be open to considering couples therapy and staying with him if he promised to never speak to his daughter again and completely cut her out of his life. I told him this was the only solution, and if he agreed to it, we could talk. Otherwise, I would move forward with the divorce. That was my ultimatum. A couple of hours later, he sent me another message saying he didn't know how to respond because Rachel only had him, but he also loved me and didn't want to give up on our marriage. He said I had put him in a difficult position and he needed time to think. He begged me not to proceed with the divorce, but I told him that the fact he was even considering this meant that neither Rachel nor I was that important to him. Since he couldn't be loyal to either of us, it would be better for me to walk away completely and make things easier for him. Realizing I had no real intention of returning to him, he started accusing me of trying to manipulate him. His tone angered me, so I decided to take screenshots of our conversation and send them to Rachel. Then I turned off my phone because I didn't want to interact with either of them anymore. It's been 2 days since then, and Thomas has been trying every possible way to contact me because after I sent the screenshots to Rachel, she left the house. She felt insulted that her father was even considering cutting ties with her to save our marriage. Thomas has been quite upset with both of us and blames me for creating this situation. He's been cursing at me, but I don't particularly feel bad about it. For the last 6 years, he had constantly enabled his daughter, allowing her to disrespect me repeatedly. I thought this was a minor way to retaliate compared to everything I had endured. This was practically nothing. He claims he did his best to balance Rachel and me and always tried to keep both of us happy. But that's not true. I was never happy. I don't particularly regret what I did, but my brother thinks I should have let it go instead of trying to create a rift between them. He told me it wasn't worth it and that revenge isn't something he usually supports. I'm conflicted about whether I should feel bad about this, and I need people to validate my decision right now. So, am I the bad person for deliberately creating drama between my soon-to-be ex-husband and his daughter, who has always hated me? Edit. I stayed with him because I loved him. When you love someone, it makes you susceptible to manipulation, and it took me a long time to realize that maybe he didn't love me as much as I loved him. I think it's common for people to do this when they're trying to take advantage of you, and that's exactly what happened to me. I'm not going to let myself be shamed for it. There's a difference between someone who is willingly a doormat and someone like me who has been manipulated in the name of love. I was making sacrifices to make my relationship work, and it took me a long time to realize I was the only one doing so, which wasn't fair to me. I understand that people might think I'm foolish for staying with him for so long, but I don't care. What matters is that I finally found the courage and strength to leave him, so I'm definitely not going to let myself be shamed. I made a mistake, just like many people do, and I think that's completely fine. So thank you to everyone who has been kind to me. And for those who haven't, I honestly don't care. Update 1. I truly appreciate everyone who has commented and supported me. I'm officially moving forward with the divorce, and Thomas received the divorce papers yesterday. I don't think he will contest them, though it's possible since I've requested a significant amount in compensation. Considering he has been relying on my income for the past 3 years, I feel it's fair for him to pay me back. Given his current financial state, he may not agree, but I'm okay with arranging a long-term payment plan. That's a matter we'll address during our mediation sessions if he attempts to push for his own terms. Thomas and Rachel haven't reached out to me in the past few days, which I'm incredibly thankful for. I don't want anything to do with them and just want some peace and quiet. I've moved out of the hotel where I was staying and am now living at a friend's house. Hopefully, no one tries to track me down here. Update 2. It's been a couple of weeks and tomorrow Thomas and I will attend our first mediation session. As I expected, he isn't willing to pay the compensation I've requested, which is surprising since at the very least he should offer to cover the cost of the car damage caused by his daughter. He seems to have forgotten his promise to pay me back, though I do have several messages where he mentions returning the money I spent on Rachel's tuition. While there's no formal contract, those messages will have to suffice for now. For those asking why I left the house, it was a rental property. Although we had been sharing the rent for the past few years, the lease was in Thomas' name. I didn't think it was worth fighting over, so I decided to leave. I'm currently searching for an apartment near my workplace and will move out of my friend's house as soon as I find one. I can't stay with my brother since he has his own family. Although they've assured me I'm welcome, I don't want anyone to have to give up their space for me. That's where things stand right now. I'm hoping the divorce mediation wraps up quickly so I can fully move on. I've already begun focusing on work and other activities to distract myself from Thomas. It's not easy, even though I know leaving him was the right choice. A part of me still has a soft spot for him. Otherwise, we wouldn't have ended up in this situation. I'm dreading seeing him tomorrow, but it's something I have to do. Who knows, maybe he'll say or do something that finally helps me let go of that lingering weakness for him. I'm just hoping everything goes smoothly. I'll likely be very busy in the coming months until the divorce is finalized, so I don't think I'll have time to post frequent updates. If I share anything further, it will probably be after everything is settled. Update 3. As promised, I'm back now that my divorce is finalized. My last update was about 7 months ago, and the process officially concluded last week. Since then, my life has been one big celebration. The past several months were extremely challenging and exhausting, but now that it's all over, I've been spending more time with friends and family. I'm even planning a trip to Greece with some of my old high school friends. I feel like I've earned this treat and plan to enjoy life to the fullest. The divorce process was long and toxic, so I won't go into too much detail, but in the end, I managed to recover all the money that was owed to me. Thomas hasn't been able to pay me everything he owes in one go, so there's still more to come. Since then, he's been portraying himself as the victim on social media, and most of our mutual friends have taken his side. They claim I acted too hastily in seeking a divorce and accuse me of never truly loving him, suggesting that leaving him must have been easy for me. On top of that, they've labeled me a gold digger and the most materialistic person they know simply because I demanded the money I was owed. I had to fight tooth and nail to recover what was rightfully mine, which dragged out the divorce proceedings even further. In the end, I warned Thomas that if he didn't pay, I would file a theft report against Rachel and potentially sue her, which wouldn't have been pleasant for anyone involved. Reluctantly, he agreed to settle the matter, though I doubt he was happy about it. I'm sure this has made me the villain in the eyes of many, but I'm at peace knowing these events revealed the true colors of people who were never my real friends. I've cut ties with Thomas and everyone who supported him during the divorce, as I don't need that kind of negativity in my life. Now, I'm focusing on the positives. I have my family, my true friends, and most importantly, I've rediscovered myself. That's all I need. As for Thomas and Rachel, I suspect they've reconciled or are at least on better terms now. If they hadn't, I doubt Thomas would have agreed to pay what he owed, and we'd likely still be fighting over the divorce. I plan to learn more about their situation soon, since I'll be attending a friend's birthday party next week, where I expect to meet someone who knows Thomas. Update 4. Last weekend, I finally attended my friend's birthday party, and it was a much-needed opportunity to relax and enjoy myself after the last few difficult months. During the celebration, I had an intriguing conversation with someone who knows both Thomas and Rachel. While I don't want to share too many details in case Thomas might come across this, I think it's worth mentioning a little of what I learned. It seems their relationship has gone through significant ups and downs following all the recent drama. Although they initially tried to rebuild their connection, the reality is that they've grown distant again. Rachel had hoped Thomas would at least co-sign a student loan to help her stay in college, but due to his debts and the failure of his business, he's unable to do so. As a result, Rachel had no choice but to drop out of school since she has no savings or other resources to support herself. She also had to find a job, but since she's never worked before, she lacks the qualifications to secure a loan on her own. Meanwhile, Thomas had to close his business, which added even more pressure to his already strained financial situation. Without an income source all this time, as he had been relying on my salary, he accrued personal debts unrelated to the business failure. He's now working at a job, though it's far from what he wanted, but at least it provides some stability. The only reason Thomas agreed to pay me what I was owed was that he hoped it would help mend his relationship with Rachel. However, it seems his efforts haven't had much success. Rachel still wants nothing to do with him, even though he's tried to make amends. I'm not surprised, as Rachel has always seemed focused on money. I suspect she may have been hoping to inherit Thomas's business when she believed it was profitable. Now that the business has failed and her father can't even co-sign a loan, she appears to have severed ties with him. I also think the screenshots I sent may have played a role in their falling out, or at least fueled the tension between them. Still, it's clear Rachel was willing to reconcile with Thomas only if it benefited her financially, like securing a loan. Regardless, I'm relieved to be out of that toxic family dynamic. I sincerely hope Thomas finds a way to improve his situation, but I'm glad to have moved on.